At 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome to all of you to our third winter lecture series. I'm Peggy Bear. I'm the president of the Ames Historical Society, and we're so glad to see a full house tonight. Nothing like a good murder to bring everybody out. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to remind you our last session is on April 26th at 7 o'clock on the McFarland Clinic story, Making Medical History for 65 Years. I know we'll all be interested in that as patrons of the McFarland Clinic. Okay, our speaker today is Nancy Bowers. Nancy has a doctorate in English and Film Studies from Drake University and is a former ISU faculty member and published author of 4 books. In the past, she served as an administrative assistant in the Iowa House of Representatives and was a clerk in the records area of the Ames Police Department. Currently, she is co-administrator for Iowa Cold Cases, and she's going to tell us more about what that is. Her American roots go deep. She is a member of the Iowa Society of Mayflower Descendants. Nancy is married to former ISU faculty member and published poet Neil Bowers, who is running the PowerPoint slides. Thank you. She'll be happy to answer questions and take comments at the conclusion of her talk. Nancy Bowers. Am I wired for sound then? Oh, sounds like it. Everything's okay with the sound? Thank you for that introduction. And I want to just take a moment to thank all the wonderful people at the Ames Historical Society. This is a special in a town the size that Ames was. And this is a picture of the women sorting the corn and so on in the canning company. It was a Chavis operation. The family served as officers, directors, and managers. Well, let's talk about Henry Chavis, the subject of the evening. He was a good-looking man, people said. He wore glasses, he combed his hair straight back, and he cut quite a fine figure with a $600 diamond ring on his left hand. Everybody knew he always carried large amounts of cash. He was active in the Masons, in the Chamber of Commerce, in the Shriners, and in national and regional canning organizations. However, Henry Chavis was not particularly well liked by Ames residents. A newspaper from the time said, and this is a quote, "He was not a warm man." He strode into the Chamber of Commerce meetings, he had his say, he cast his vote, and he left. Some people thought he put on airs, I've been told, and felt superior to them, and he had very few close friends. And a newspaper at the time said, quote, "Ames people knew him as a brisk man with a dollar. He always got his money's worth, and he conducted business with quick decisions and very little conversation." Now, this is a rumor, and it was told to me by Dennis. Henry was popular, however, with the female canning company workers. And Dennis tells me, I'm blaming this all on Dennis, it was rumored that Gertrude Chavis frequently dropped into the back to check out the young women there and to check out what her husband was up to. Now, this is a slide of Gertrude Chavis, who's a very pretty woman. Dennis tells me again that she was an attractive, chain-smoking, fashionably dressed brunette. And she had 2 passions. She liked to gamble in the early casinos of Las Vegas, and she liked to bowl. This is a plat of where the Chavis farm was. This is a plat of Washington County. And Alan made that green right where the pointer is. That was where the Chavis farm was. In 1946, they moved to this farm, and it was a 4-bedroom home, very nice home on a large farm a mile south of Ames in Washington Township. It was built in 1868, but the Chavises thoroughly remodeled it and modernized it. And the house sat on the west side of Highway 69. It wasn't South Duff then, but it was Highway 69 as it left the then city limits. And to the southwest, in the early 40s, the city of Ames bought land for the airport. And we have a couple of overhead maps that Alan prepared. The yellow spot is the Chavis farm. And then Highway 69 goes flush past it. There's South 16, where Lincoln Way is, and then the city of Ames, and then campus area. And we have another slide. This is a more recent one. This was from 1972, and Alan wanted to include this because it shows the on and off ramps for Highway 30. So it gives you a little more feeling of where this was. And Neil, will you point to the Chavis farm, please? No, there. A little farther. Yeah, that's the motel. A little just, there we go, right there. That's South 16. This whole area was annexed by the city of Ames in 1963. Well, we have a slide to show you of the Chavis farm today. This is it. At South 16th and South Duff, where the former Benson Motors and the old Chicago are located. When he moved to the Highway 69 location, Henry Chavis became a wealthy gentleman farmer. In addition to running the canning company, he farmed nearly 300 acres. He had a large barn and hog house, and he fed his cattle with refuse from the canning company. He had tenants, Dale and Levon Malcolm, and they lived in a small house northwest of the Chavis home. And the day-to-day farming was done by Grant Mitchell with some help from the Chavis son-in-law, Carl Renwood. Well, let's get down to the murder. The day of the murder, Sunday, November 7, 1948, was moderate for early November. The temperatures were in the upper 40s and the lower 50s, and it was overcast all day. The humidity was high, and it snowed just a couple of days later. The Chavises were enjoying some downtime. The busy canning season was over, and the harvest on their own farm was finished. And Henry, Gertrude said, was in great spirits. Around noon, Henry and Gertrude shared what we Iowans call dinner, and he planned to attend a Masonic drill practice later in the day, and he had bought a new sword for his uniform that he was taking with him. Gertrude told him goodbye, and then she drove to Marshalltown with Melba Paulson and Edna Crawley to bowl in a tournament. The ladies had a flat tire on the way home, and Gertrude didn't get back to the farm until about 9 p.m. Henry was not home, so she went to a movie. She came back to their house at 11 p.m. and parked her car inside their one-car garage, and they had this arrangement because her car was newer than his. He had a 1941 Chevrolet. And then she was tired from her long day, so she went to her upstairs bedroom on the far north side of the house. Gertrude was awakened about 1:30 a.m. by a coughing fit, and she got up to see if Henry had come in. When it seemed he hadn't, she returned to bed, and she said she slept soundly the rest of the night. And heavy traffic passed noisily on Highway 69, which of course was a major north-south truck route then, and it was called the Jefferson Highway. Authorities knew where Henry Chavis spent the afternoon of Sunday and that night, and who he was with, but they didn't make that information public because they insisted it had nothing to do with his death. It was leaked to the press, however, that Chavis was in Des Moines during the day and was seen about 10 o'clock that night at a cafe on Highway 30 between Ames and Boone. This is an aerial photograph taken by the Des Moines Register, I'm assuming the day after the murder. And you can see Highway 69 on the right going down, and the driveway where he would have come in. Parked his car, the garage. I think it's interesting to note Gertrude's location of her bedroom because it was a very big house. It was much bigger than it looks in some photos, and she was on the very far north side of it. And then the tenants lived up to the northwest. When Chavis returned to his farm in the early morning, probably between 3 and 4 a.m., he was either followed by somebody or someone was lying in wait for him. He parked his car behind the house in front of the garage, where he always did. And he may have seen his assailant in the illumination of the headlights when he pulled in the driveway, because he got out of his car in a real hurry, and he left his top coat on the seat, and he didn't lock the doors, which was his compulsive habit. Well, there was a waxing crescent moon, and it cast very little light through the overcast skies, but Chavis, authorities think, could see well enough to look straight at the person who meant him harm and maybe even walk towards him. As the first shot was fired, he threw up his right arm like this, as we would to protect our face. The bullet went through his arm and into his shoulder. He spun around and was shot in the mid-back, and then he fell face down on the ground. And while he lay on the ground, he was executed with a bullet that entered the back of his head and exited through his throat. The assailant rifled his pockets, took his wallet, and disappeared into the darkness. And for the rest of the night, Henry Chavis, covered in blood, lay on the ground 12 feet from the back door of his own house, near a pile and a tree and 2 piles of sand. So this is his 1941 Chevrolet, and then there's piles of sand and where they found his body. And you can see how very close he was to getting into the house when he was shot. About 7 o'clock on Monday morning, the Chavis' maid named Nellie Albert arrived for work in a checker taxi cab that was driven by Eugene Red Dinsmore, who was a local movie projectionist. The two of them found Henry's body on a patch of blood-soaked earth near a sidewalk behind the house. So Nellie Albert rushed inside to tell Gertrude, and she called the Ames police. And Bob's father responded. This is Officer, there he is, Arlie Schumer. He responded to the call, and when he got there, I think it's different protocol than we would have now for a death scene. But instead of calling the coroner, who was eventually called, he called for the family physician for the Chavis family, and that was Dr. Joe Fellows. So when Dr. Joe Fellows got there, he asked Arlie Schumer to turn the body over. And he said, well, he's dead, and I'm going to call a hearse. By that time, Gertrude Chavis had collapsed inside the house, and Dr. Fellows had to sedate her. Local morticians Frank Adams and Merle Ross Jr. drove Henry Chavis's body to Adams' funeral home. Now here's a wonderful picture. The Ames police cordoned off the scene and they combed it for clues. And we've looked at this and compared it to what would be done in a contemporary crime scene with yellow crime tape. And you can see these are just crude poles and then string from twine. And then the twine has just been thrown on the ground. But that was their crime scene tape at the time. Officer Schumer spotted an empty cartridge from a .32 caliber gun and 2 unfired bullets in the pile of sand near where Chavis had fallen. And the Monday evening's Ames Daily Tribune featured a front page of Arlie Schumer pointing to where he spotted the bullet. And you can see this was big news in Ames. That was the front page of the newspaper the next day. Some accounts said that curious neighbors had already swamped the yard and house, trampling any evidence that existed. Coroner Guy Mills of McCallsburg and Story County Attorney Ed Kelly came to the scene to take over for Story County because it was in their jurisdiction. At the time, the county sheriff was named Gus Hall. Investigators from the Iowa Bureau of Criminal Investigation, which was called the BCI then, also arrived to help. Well, this is a picture of the D.W. Doc Nebergall, and he was the chief of the BCI at the time, and he helped head up the state's inquiry. He was a very interesting person. He was known as the J. Edgar Hoover of Iowa. because he brought scientific methods to the Bureau, and he went so far as he personally purchased equipment for the lab so that they could merge criminology and science, which of course now is very commonplace, but it wasn't then. Nevergall also was unfamiliar ground because he was a former Story County sheriff. Nevergall dug up the bullet and the spent cartridge that Patrolman Schumer saw earlier, and he took them to Des Moines for analysis. There was an extensive search near the scene for the murder weapon, but nothing was found. The cartridges in the bullet were from a .32 caliber automatic pistol, which was similar to one inside the Chavis house. But that gun was a World War II souvenir brought back by Lorraine's husband, Ralph Hagen, and ballistics tests ruled it out. The next day, authorities questioned the entire Chavis family. An autopsy was performed on Henry Chavis by a BCI physician in Adams Funeral Home in Ames, and another bullet was recovered from his abdomen. It's been my experience that coroner's juries were at this time and earlier always made up of three very prominent people in the community, I think always men usually. And this coroner's jury was made up of names that will be familiar to you. Arthur H. Eschbach, from the movie The Music Store, Immerhoff Peterson, shoe store, and W.L. Shafroth. They met with the coroner in the council chambers of City Hall to hear all the testimony, and then they walked over to Adams Funeral Home and examined the body. And they were shown that Henry Chavis's right index finger was broken, and that his right hand was very badly bruised. The conclusion of the coroner's jury was that Henry Chavis was killed by, quote, person or persons unknown. This is a slide, oh, sorry. This is shows you how much interest there was in the community about the funeral arrangements. This was the day of the funeral. Henry Chavis's funeral was held Thursday afternoon, November 11th, at First Methodist Church in Ames. It was conducted by the Reverend Robert Pinnell, organist Mrs. Harold Eablestein, accompanied soloist Noel Taylor, who sang Beautiful Isle of Somewhere. Chavis's casket was a fine, dark, solid walnut exterior, and it had rose tan crepe exterior. I know all this because Dennis found out. And this is a detail that Dennis loves, and I love it too. Adams Funeral Home billed Gertrude Chavis 60 cents for having the suit that Henry wore in his casket pressed at Ames Emporium. This is the Oakwood section of the Ames Cemetery, and it's where Henry Chavis is buried. This is another picture of it. Neil, can you point to the stone? There it is, right there. That's looking northwest. Well, the murder continued to be investigated, of course. And there was a relatively new invention called the lie detector test. And in early February of 1949, Chicago resident Leonard Keeler, you see here, he considered himself the inventor of the lie detector. He came from Chicago to Nevada, and he administered polygraphs to 10 people, including Gertrude Chavis and other family members. But those results were not released to the public. And I think that this lie detector machine is probably very similar to what they use now. It looks like a blood pressure cuff. And I can't tell you that this is the one that he used for the Chavis murder, but this is a picture of him posing with one of his machines. But no results were released to the public. On November 30, Gertrude Chavis announced a $2,500 award for information about her husband's murder, but her offer expired in 6 months. And the Des Moines Register also offered $1,000. When the contents of Chavis's will were made public, it was seen that he left everything to Gertrude. 2 months after the murder, The canning operation was sold to the Minnesota Valley Canning Company of Lesueur, Minnesota for $100,000. The plant then operated under the Green Giant name until it closed in 1957. And these employees are sporting the Green Giant logo. So it would have been after the company was sold. In mid-February of 1949, 1,200 people, many newspapers said, lured by curiosity, attended an auction at Chavis Place. The crowd was described as swarming over the farm, and Gertrude and her daughter Lorraine Hagen realized a $15,000 profit from the sale. She took this money and she built the El Rancho Motel. Now, all of us remember the El Rancho. It was at the intersection of Highway 69 and Airport Road. Some people assumed that she named the El Rancho in Ames after the famous one in Las Vegas where she was known to gamble. This is a composite of that casino and hotel in Las Vegas in the late 1940s. She also built the Silver Saddle Motel, and that was just south of the Chavis property. So it was just south of her house. And the Chavis barn is visible on the right side over the, yeah, right there. There's the Chavis barn that was still intact when this postcard photo was taken. Eventually, Gertrude Chavis and her daughter and son-in-law, the Hagens, owned 4 motel properties in the Ames area. And tragedy just seemed to plague this family. In June of 1949, 7 months after Henry Chavis's murder, his son-in-law, Carl Renberg, was killed when his heavily loaded small plane hit some power lines and crashed and burst into flames on a farm in Benton County. Renblum was returning with seed corn for the Minnesota Valley Canning Company, for which he had continued to work. Well, it seemed like all the leads were exhausted, all the speculation had been made, and all the theories had been spun, and the rumors had been talked about. And then something very startling happened. This is a picture of the Duff Avenue Bridge as it crosses Squaw Creek at Duff Avenue. And we have another one of those. In 1950, about 2 years after the murder, the investigation was just broken open by sensational news. On April 17, 1950, 2 local boys named Cole Foster and Boyd Larson were playing along Squaw Creek under the, I call it the Carney Bridge, on Duff Avenue. This is a picture of the boys. Cole was the son of Glenn Foster, and he lived at 204 South Kellogg, and Boyd Larson was the son of Thomas and Catherine Larson at 731 5th Street. Well, as they were playing along Squaw Creek, west of the bridge, and this would be about a mile north of the Chavis home, the 2 boys found a gun embedded in the mud and the rocks. Immediately, it was suspected that the gun had something to do with the Chavis murders, and the 2 boys became local celebrities, as you can imagine. Boyd Larson died in 1989. However, Cole Foster was located by Jerry Litzel, and he recently mailed a letter to the Historical Society about his memories of finding that gun. He lives in Colorado, by the way. This is an excerpt from his letter. It was an exciting time for Boyd and me, with our picture in the Ames Tribune, our names in the Des Moines Tribune, and an interview on local radio. But our connection was coincidental, a product of 2 little boys playing by the river as we did every day. I do remember that Boyd and I were excited that we might be in line for the rewards, which seemed as huge to us as the national debt. And this picture, the picture is gone now, but that was mother of one of the boys, and she was there as they reenacted it for the Ames Tribune. Cole and Boyd turned the .32 caliber Colt automatic over to Ames Police Chief Orville J. Erickson, who gave the gun to the BCI. Now, Ivan Shalley was sheriff in 1950. My husband loves this picture. He says this looks like Roderick Crawford on Highway Patrol. And it does. I just love that hat. He's very, very serious. Ivan Chavis said that this was really the first good clue that they had in this murder. But the gun was very rusty, and it was corroded from mud and water. And the BCI investigators weren't very optimistic about what they could learn from it. But Doc Nevergall rode to the rescue again. He took the gun to his BCI lab and he soaked it in various solutions, and he was able to raise serial numbers on this gun. And the startling news was that the numbers matched those on a .32 caliber Colt the Chavis family reported stolen in a home robbery in the winter of 1948, along with some clothing, cigarette lighters, and some .32 caliber bullets. Chavis had bought this gun at an Ames hardware store in 1938. Well, Doc Nevergall put on quite an exhibition for the media. He invited all the media in to watch him test fire this gun. And he put together a 5-foot-long box and packed it with cotton. And he shot the gun into that box. He was very proud of the fact that a gun in such bad condition could be fired. And he did send those test fired bullets and the ones that they found at the scene to an unspecified lab for comparison. But he said the results would not be released to the public, and they never were. Still, it was Henry Chavis's gun. That much is known. Well, as life has a tendency to do it, life goes on. Gertrude did not remarry after Henry's murder. She stayed active in Ames League bowling, was an officer, this is Gertrude with her bowling ball. She was an officer in the local women's bowling organization, and she was made a permanent member of the Women's International Bowling Congress. This is a picture, to me this is interesting because of the great interest in bowling that was at the time. I think this was 1955, and Gertrude bowled for the Solar Inn team. A lot of us remember the Solar Inn meeting there. Gertrude's scores, her honors, and her trophies were featured prominently in the Ames Tribune. And this is Gertrude as an older woman. She's receiving a bowling trophy in this one. In 1967, Gertrude sold the house and the farm for commercial development. And she auctioned off many items as they were advertised in the newspaper. There was farm equipment, tools, there was an Underwood noiseless typewriter, I can't imagine such a thing. There was jewelry, a loom, a broad axe, a muzzle-loading rifle, and a single-action pistol. This is the location of the El Rancho today. It no longer exists, but it went through a series of name changes, the last being the South Duck Inn. And it closed in the mid-1990s, and it's approximately where the Sam's Club parking lot is today. The Silver Saddle, too, underwent name and management changes until the land was sold for commercial development. Gertrude died August 4th, 1968, and she's buried beside Henry in the Ames Cemetery. And you can see this is like a book. My co-administrator at Iowa Cold Cases said, well, it's sort of like an open book, like their lives became after the murder. 2 months before Gertrude's death, lightning struck the building that was once Henry Chavis's canning company, and it burned to the ground. And at the time, a lot of us remembered that the business was Collegiate Pacific. Henry's and Gertrude's daughter, Lorraine Hagen, died in February 1990, and her sister Doris died 8 months later. They both died here in Ames. Well, here we come to the question of the evening. Who killed Henry Chavis? Was it a robbery? Gertrude claimed that Henry might have had $2,000 to $3,000 on his person that day. Because his wallet was missing, the crime looked like a robbery. But if it was a robbery, why didn't the killer take his expensive wristwatch and his cigarette lighter? And why was the $600 diamond ring still on his left hand? Story County Attorney Ed Kelly believed the wallet was taken just to create the impression of a robbery. And Gertrude came forward and said that her husband had worn the diamond ring for years and couldn't get it off over his knuckle. And in fact, Adam's funeral home had to take nippers and clip it off his body in order to return it to Gertrude, so maybe it wasn't possible to remove. Was the killer someone that Chavis knew? The word grudge came up in official accounts of the case. And one official said, and I love this quote, "It seems that the third bullet was fired by someone who had a vicious mad-on for Mr. Chavis." Chavis's no-nonsense and unfriendly manner in business dealings sometimes caused tempers to flare, and he made a lot of enemies. An Ames police officer told the Tribune, and this is a quote, "If we questioned everybody in town who had said at one time or another he would like to take a clip at Chavis's chin, it would take us months." The Chavis family described for authorities all the squabbles and the disagreements that he had, and Gertrude said, "I don't think any of these things were serious enough that someone would want to kill him." There was much gossip about Henry Chavis's love of the ladies, fueling speculation that a suspicious husband could be the killer. Now remember, his right index finger was broken, and his right hand was bruised. That made some people wonder if he'd been in a fist fight earlier in the evening, and the other person perhaps followed him home to even the score to continue the scuffle. Or was it a family member? The community immediately began speculating about Gertrude's involvement or that of his family as soon as the murder was released to the public. The Des Moines Register wrote, and this is a quote, "The Chavis family makes no pretense that things have been going smoothly for its members in the last several years. Gertrude admitted Henry went his own way. He offered no explanations to her for staying out all night, and they slept in separate bedrooms." A Des Moines Register reporter who described Gertrude at this time said, "She was a tall, handsome woman of 53 who had aged appreciably since the slaying of her husband." She told this reporter, and she sobbed brokenly to him, "They're saying that one of us is responsible for it. Oh, how could anyone even think such a thing? We had our disagreements, but it is still incredible to me that my husband has been killed." In his recent letter, Cole Foster, one of the boys who found the gun, said he heard rumors that Gertrude was having an affair. Did Gertrude, because of jealousy or a desire to be with someone else, shoot Henry or hire someone to kill him, promising that person the large amount of cash that was on Henry's body? Did Gertrude provide the gun to someone to kill Henry for her, making it look as though the gun were stolen? Gertrude told the Des Moines Register, quote, "People have been able to find a lot of talk in this pistol business." Well, there's another theory. Did the Mafia do it? Gertrude loved to gamble in early Las Vegas casinos. Her habit was so strong, according to a story in the Nevada Journal, that Henry had recently gotten a court order to restrain her from gambling. Las Vegas, Gertrude's favorite gaming spot, was controlled by the Mafia in 1948. Some wondered if Gertrude plotted to have her husband murdered or killed him to use his insurance and other assets, including the cash on his body, to pay her casino debts. The Story County Sheriff's Office told the Nevada Journal that they believed the murder was committed by organized crime and gambling interests because Chavis had cut off one of their best customers in Gertrude. And the manner of death, the method of death, was indeed the standard mob hit, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. Others thought that Henry's death was a message from the mob to Gertrude to pay up. Well, there's yet another theory, and I depend, as I always do, at everything on Dennis for this. Everyone in Ames had a theory, and Dennis's relatives, the Charles Van Patter family, those were his grandparents. They were neighbors of the Chavises, south on 69. They thought they knew who did it. And Dennis's father always swore he would reveal the name of the murderer before he died, but he never did. Now this is the Van Patter farm from above. beautiful, I think it's a kind of a farm with beautiful white buildings. And this is another view, and if Neil will point up to the, up farther above the sign, the very corner. You know, remember that, the signs that used to be in old-time saloons? I'm going to paraphrase it here. Please don't shoot the PowerPoint operator. He's doing the best he can. Anyway, in the far left-hand corner would have been where the Chavis house was. So that gives you an orientation. And this is what it looks like today. I always call this place the Blue Barn. It is officially the Ames Greenhouse Floral Company. Well, to understand the Van Patter's theory of murder, it's necessary to look back at another very sensational crime that took place along Highway 69. This happened in 1941, 7 years before Chavis was murdered. Now this will give you the locations of the three important places. At the top of the slide is the Chavis farm, and in the middle is the Van Patter farm, and then down here is the Overland Tourist Camp. Do you remember that one? The tourist camp and nine-hole golf course. It was owned and operated by Alma and Gunnar Oberlin. These are pictures from the late 1940s of the tourist camp. They're wonderful photos. You can see the cabins going down. And so Neil and I got kind of nosy as we went out there a few weeks ago and poked around to see what was still there. This is a, Neil, can you go back a couple? Okay, then, I don't know, Dennis, do you know when this next slide was taken? Do you know what that is? Okay. And then the ones that follow are ones that Neil and I just took a few weeks ago. That was the main office of the tourist group. And this, the reason we know these things is that a very wonderful lady lives there. And she's lived there since the late 1940s. Her name is Donna Nickel. And she knows the history of the property, and she's just a wealth of information about this place. And where she has her flower bed today was the Bathhouse Foundation when the tourist camp was open. And down by the propane tank, going down this way, would have been the cabins, and back where the trees are, the golf course was back in there. Now this is a wonderful artifact from the Overland Tourist Camp. This is a carousel, which was there for children to play on, and it's still functional today. It's a wonderful artifact. And then, of course, children always have a maypole to hang from chains and swing around. And so there was one there. This is the maypole of the tourist camp. Now, where the patch of snow is, Donna Nickel tells me that there was a Quonset hut and a tunnel underneath there, and that's where Gunnar Oberlin had his still. And that's where he stored his liquor for the bootleggers to come in from Des Moines and cart away. So, who knows? This is a picture of Gunnar Oberlin. In Norway, he was born in Norway, he was a ski champion. He came to America in 1913, and he served in World War I. And like many other soldiers in that war, there were very, very severe consequences for him. He battled demons after the war. He had post-traumatic stress disorders, what we call it today. He was what they called shell-shocked then. And these problems, coupled with alcohol, kept him in mental institutions for many years. 5 times he escaped from mental institutions and came home to Story County. Well, while he was in the mental institutions, his wife Alma and their children ran the tourist camp. In mid-October of 1941, now this is 7 years before Henry Chavis was murdered, Gunnar Oberlin escaped yet again from the Iowa Lunatic Asylum in Mount Pleasant. He made his break when they were taking patients to go see a movie. He got home to Story County, and he began making threats against his family, and he talked of suicide. and his family requested a committal order for him. This is Story County Sheriff Vernon McGriff. And on the overcast and rainy evening of October 20, 1941, Sheriff McGriff led a posse of area law enforcement to serve the committal order on Gunner Overland. And we know a lot about that event because this is unbelievable that this could happen. It certainly wouldn't happen today. But an Ames AP newspaper reporter tagged along with them. In fact, he carried the tear gas bombs with him. And he reported his experiences from first-person point of view for his readers. So the men arrived at the tourist camp, and the plan had been ahead of time, worked out with the Overlands, that the wife and the daughter would come outside, and then the law enforcement would throw a tear gas bomb into the house. They got close enough that they could see the two women sitting at the kitchen table, and they were listening to Gunner Overland, and he was lying on a cot. He was telling them that he did not want to live, and he had a .38 caliber revolver. The wife and the daughter became confused because things got slowed down by muddy roads, and they were waiting for law enforcement to come, and they were late in coming, and so they ran out of the house, and law enforcement ran in. Gunner Overland bolted from his cot into the dark room, and he opened fire, which was returned, of course, by the law enforcement posse. Overland was struck by 13 bullets. Newspapers termed it a hail of gunfire, and he died instantly. Then Sheriff McGriff called out, "I think he got me." McGriff was put in a chair where he slumped over and he died, and he'd been shot in the chest. And Vernon McGriff is the only Story County law enforcement official killed in the line of duty. Well, there was someone else that was in the way of bullets that night. This was Deputy Sheriff Harry Mills. He was wounded in the right leg during the gun battle, and he underwent surgery later that night. After he recovered from his bullet wounds, Harry Mills was sworn in and served as a Story County Sheriff until 1944. And this brings us back to the Chavis murder. What the Van Patters believed was that one of their own family, Harry Mills, the nephew of Charles Van Patter, killed Henry Chavis because Chavis was having an affair with Harry Mills' attractive wife, Viva. This is the same Harry Mills who was wounded in the Gunner Overland shootout and then became the Story County Sheriff. If Harry Mills was the killer, were local area law enforcement officials reluctant to prosecute him because they knew him so well? Well, there aren't any answers. Harry Mills died suddenly, 3 months after the Chavis murder, and his attractive widow, Viva, immediately left Iowa and never came back. Well, the Chavis case got colder and colder, but interest over the years has never waned, as we can see tonight by so many of you who've come to talk about it. An Ames detective told me that when he was a rookie in the late 1980s, his captain would tell him, "Don't sit around here, go out and solve the Henry Chavis murder." So that's my charge to you. I want you to find out who killed Henry Chavis. Was it a robber? A disgruntled business associate? A jealous husband? Someone in his own family? His own wife? The Mafia? The former Story County Sheriff? Or was it someone else? A lot of people took a lot with them to their graves. The answer may never be known because, after all, remember I told you, you can get away with murder. I thought I would leave some time to have questions if you have any theories, speculation, gossip. You know, it's real hard for me to see. I see a hand back here now.
today on Iowa Public Radio, they were talking about code cases. Was that a coincidence, or? But they had a program on code cases today.
It was coordinated to be
That was a nice
with this
touch.
program. I actually was supposed to be on it, and I declined. So, and I can tell you about that if you'd like to know, but that involves Iowa cold cases, and I would, if you have some theories or some questions about the Henry Chavis murder, I'm glad to answer those. But yes, no, it isn't anything special that I know of. It was done to coordinate with this program. Nobody has a theory? Yeah, Jared has a theory? Oh, his question is, how long, when was the gun stolen from, what was Gertrude doing all day?
Must have been a heck of a movie.
She arranges to be out of town and doesn't get back to Ames till 9 o'clock, and it's been a long, tiring day. She's bowled in a tournament, she's changed a flat tire, and yet she goes to a movie when she gets home. And then when she comes home, it's 11 o'clock, and he's still not there. So I don't know where else she could have gone, but to bed. And then just say, I didn't hear anything. And yeah, it does, I mean, it just sort of looks like she was spending time away from the farm that day. Give somebody a voice. Yes?
Was there an explanation why she didn't hear the gunshot?
Well, because she said because she slept in the farthest bedroom from the crime scene. But he was shot on the south side of the house. She slept in the far north bedroom upstairs. And there was a lot of traffic on Highway 69.
This is a little bit off the subject, but could you bowl in Ames in 1948?
Yeah.
Where was their bowling alley?
20th century.
I don't know, maybe Genesis. Where was the bowling?
Above Lukalons.
Above Lukalons.
Lukalons, he said. I don't know when the 20th century bowling.
Yeah.
Did you say something that she heard a coughing fit and she got up?
No, she had a coffee.
Oh, she had a coughing fit. Okay, I thought if I heard somebody, I wouldn't
Yeah,
be
yeah. She had a coughing fit at 1:30. She got up and looked to see if it was home yet. But I'm not sure why she cared, because she told the Des Moines Register that he never explained to her where he went to all hours, and it wasn't unusual for him to stay out so long. And also, they slept in separate bedrooms.
I have a question. Did they find any evidence of any other vehicle tire tracks or any footprints near the body or in the driveway?
I'm not aware if there were, that wasn't reported to the newspapers, and again, if we could find, documentation of the investigation, that might be, but I don't know, that's the only answer I have. Anybody else? Well, and then I want to tell you why I wasn't on the public radio. But go ahead, and ask your question.
Well, my question was concerning, in your introduction, you mentioned hundreds of perpetrators have gotten away with it
Yeah,
in Iowa.
yeah.
And my question is there a record of each one of these cases on file somewhere?
Well, the website that I co-administer, we're documenting them. And we have nearly 600 people, and I don't think that's everybody.
Right.
I think the crimes are underreported. Sometimes the sheriff's office or local police will say, well, we know who did it. So they don't think of it as a cold crime. And I do just a lot of research on a daily basis, just looking through old newspapers, trying to find unsolved murders. And I find more and more and more. It's very, very amazing and kind of depressing, really.
Question back here.
Back to Gertrude and the Late Show. Did she go by herself? Or did
I
she
assumed, but I don't know. She just said when I got back to the farm, he wasn't home, so I went to a movie, but my question is, well, he was never home, so what do you care?
Yeah.
Oh, my husband says, you know, that one of the people who found the body was Red Denzel, and he was a movie perfectionist. So I don't know if there's any connection there or not. Well, let me ask you something. Neil's going to put up another slide. Do you know who this is? Who is this? Anybody? Well, this is Roger Warren, and he was 12 years old. And he was playing by the Mississippi River with his brother in August of 1979, and a man approached them, and he told Roger, I'll give you a 10-speed bike and I'll take you to a baseball game if you'll go across the Crescent Bridge across the Mississippi with me. And he sent the little brother home. And 6 days later, Roger's body was found in the Mississippi with a rope around his neck. He'd been strangled and he'd been sexually assaulted. And no one knows who he is, and no one remembers him. This is very sad to me. This is the saddest part of my work. Recently, a woman wrote to me. She's now nearly 50 years old, and she tutored Roger when he was a grammar school student, and she was a middle school student. And she told me about Roger. She said he came from a very poor family. He was probably physically abused at home, and he was neglected, and he was very hungry for love and attention. And she still keeps in her jewelry box a note that Roger wrote her all these years later. It says, I love you, Roger. Now, his murder was never solved, and his case is no publicity in cold cases are mentioned, even about murdered or missing 12-year-old boys. When I say cold cases to you, what comes to your mind immediately? Johnny Gosh. And Jody Houston, yes.
Clarence Martin.
But we have 558 other cases, like Roger, who they haven't been solved. I have another slide. Do you know who this is? This is Gracilia Grace Escobar. She was 25 years old. She was the mother of a 6-year-old daughter named Angie, and she lived in Mason City. In June of 1983, she wanted to go out with her friends. So she took her daughter to the grandparents, who loved her dearly. She went out with her friends, and she was never seen again. When police went to her home, they found covers turned down on her bed. She obviously had prepared before she went out for the evening to go home. Her wallet and her driver's license were on the nightstand, and she's never been seen again. This was in 1983, but no one ever talks about Grace Escobar when missing people come up, not even missing people in Mason City. And this is why I didn't want to be on the public radio program, because they wanted to talk exclusively about Johnny Gosh and about Jody Houston. And it's, to me, it's, when those two cases are mentioned, just all the energy and oxygen, everything gets sucked out of the room. And I'm not saying they don't deserve attention, please don't misunderstand me, but they are instances where people have been really good at keeping them in front of the public, but Roger, Warren, and Grace Escobar have nobody to do that for them, except strangers who maybe met them or her parents are now dead. Maybe her little girl that was 6 years old when she was murdered. So that was why I chose not to do it. I felt that it wasn't really fair to the other victims. I thought you might be interested in just a few more cases. I'll be real brief here. Some of the most interesting cases we have on Iowa cold cases. Well, did you know that Iowa had a serial poisoner? In the 1940s, University of Iowa student Lyman Ellison, I didn't bring a slide up, I should have, because it's wonderful looking. He poisoned his grandfather, his grandmother, his mother, his step-grandmother, and possibly his father. Killed them with strychnine. Now, the step-grandmother lived, but the rest of them died. Lyman Ellison was never brought to trial, never found guilty of these crimes, even though it was pretty well known that he had done it. And it's kind of scary to think he's still alive. He's out there someplace. Another interesting case was the Black Hand murders. Maybe you've heard of the Black Hand. It's a group of Italians who, in the 20s and the 30s, ran an extortion racket. And they actually targeted other Italian Americans. And this happened in Des Moines. They would extort money from them, or they'd say, you know, give me money or we'll kill you or someone you love. And there were 4 Black Hand murders in the 19-teens and 20s in Des Moines. And I think that's fascinating. Another one that's really interesting is there were teenagers, a brother and a sister named Lena and Tommy Peterson. Again, you've probably never heard of them. They were beaten to death on their way home from church in Highland Park, Des Moines, in 1902, possibly by their own brother. And then one of my very favorite people is Myrtle Cook. In 1925, she lived in Benton, Iowa. She was killed by a bullet that was fired through the window while she was writing a speech. And Myrtle Cook was the head of the regional Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Women's Auxiliary of the Ku Klux Klan. And she had a full-planned funeral. Her casket was borne by robed Klansmen. And after the service, the burial service at the grave, they burned the cross, even though it was broad daylight. So these are just some of our victims, and some of the more maybe sensational ones. But don't forget that there's so many more people out there than the ones that you hear about. And if you have information, if you think you know something about a crime, the best thing to do is to get in touch with the jurisdiction where it happened and report it, and report what you have. Are there any questions about Iowa cold cases? I'd be happy to answer. Well, thank you very much. It was a great audience.